Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started here. I was asked to put together a presentation on city government in Morris. My name is Blaine Hill. I'm the city manager for the city of Morris. A little bit about me. I actually grew up in Morris. I was born and raised here. I graduated from high school in 1977 at Morris High School. And from there I went on to vocational school and got a degree in accounting. Got hired as the city accountant in Morris, and then I decided to go back to school. So I went to the University of Minnesota Morris, and I got a degree in political science. Political science, the study of government, and my area of interest was local government, state and local governments. And from there, I got my first administrative job, and that was as the city clerk treasurer for the city of Breckenridge, Minnesota, where that position I was both the chief financial officer and I was also the chief administrative officer for the city. And then I was there for about 17 years, and then I applied for the job as the city manager in Morris, and I came back to Morris in 2007 and took over as the city manager. So that's how I got to be here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk a little bit about what is the city government in Morris and what do I do. I'll start out by just saying that I'm sitting in the city council chambers. If you don't know where that's at, it's down by the library. Otter Tail Power is across the street from us. We're in the Senior Citizen Center, and this is where the city council meets. I'm actually sitting in the mayor's chair, so I'm not supposed to be holding his gavel, but he's not here, so I've got his gavel, and this is where all the meetings take place for the city council. Now, the one thing I will tell you is that we are currently living in a day and age that nobody ever expected, and I've never seen in the 61 years I've been alive. And I think it's important for you to understand as students that you are going through something that nobody else has been through in generations. I think the last major pandemic was in 1918 with the major flu outbreak, and a lot of young people were affected by that. And so I'm actually sitting in a council chambers that we're probably not going to utilize for at least the month of April. Last night we tried our first Zoom meeting. You probably have heard of Zoom meetings if you're in the school system. And the next city council meeting we're going to try to do by a Zoom meeting. So the city council, the mayor and the city council members won't be here. So I'm going to do, hopefully I don't make anybody sick, but I'm going to just back up and do a quick spin around the city council chambers. As I said, we're in the Senior Citizen Center, and I'm sitting in the mayor's seat. If you notice, way in the back of the room, you're going to see a tripod. We actually have a camera that we record our city council meetings, and depending on technology, sometimes it doesn't work right because we're not IT people, but we try to do that every city council meeting. And recently, this last year, we got a nice big screen TV where we can put things like budget presentations on the screen so people can see what is happening. And as I said, I'm sitting in the mayor's chair. We have a mayor and 4 city council members that are elected at large, which means that they represent the entire city. In some communities, they're represented, they are elected to represent certain areas of the city, but not here in Morris. They're not allocated to a specific part of the city. To my far right is a secretary that takes all the minutes of the meeting and collects all the information, that things that need to be signed at the time, like bill lists and stuff like that, and takes that back to City Hall and processes it. To her left is the city attorney. We actually have a very unique situation in Morris and Stevens County, and it was prompted because I had that situation up in Breckenridge and Wilkin County where the county and the city went in together and hired their own attorney to be the city county attorney. And when the last city attorney here that was hired as a private attorney got appointed judge in this district, we went together and we went in with the county and we hired an attorney. Actually, we have two attorneys now that work specifically for the city of Morris, Stevens County, and some of the other small cities in Stevens County. His name's Aaron Jordan. I sit next to Aaron Jordan, and then it's the mayor in this chair, and then next to the mayor is, and our mayor is Sheldon Gies. Next to the mayor is Jeff Miller, who's a council member. He also serves as the ex officio mayor, the mayor pro temp, in case the mayor is not here to conduct the meetings, then he would fill in. And then we have Councilmember Kim Gullickson, Councilmember Brian Salvi, and Councilmember Kevin Wallers. That's who sits here. There is a small table off to the side of the council desk, and that's where the press sits, because the press has a right to be at the meetings. And actually, I'm going to talk really quick about how we're going to do things with Zoom meetings, and then I'll go into what we actually do in city government. But we do have press here, and then we do have an area for the public to come. And typically, a council meeting, they're held on the second and fourth Tuesdays of the month at 5:15 in the afternoon. And right now, as I said, we're going to do Zoom meetings under Minnesota state law. We are allowed to adjust how we conduct business because of either an emergency or, in the case right now, a pandemic, where we're basically given an order from the governor to stay at home. So stay at home, stay safe, wash your hands, be careful when you're out and about, because that's how we're going to be able to get through this environment that we're in now. So under state law, because of a pandemic, what we can do is we can do a council meeting by a telephone conference call, or now we have technology. And you live in an era where you have technology. Can you imagine what would happen if we lived in an era where we literally only had the radio and the television and the newspaper to give us information about what we needed to do? I grew up in an era like that. We had one television that was in the living room, and there was only a handful of channels. And we all pretty much got our information from either the television or the radio. So now we can do a Zoom meeting, which we tried one last night. We still have some technology issues we're working on, but we're going to do one next Tuesday where we're actually going to have the city council come in through technology into a Zoom meeting room on a computer. I'll probably be sitting here with my computer as administrator, and then we'll conduct business that way, as long as they can hear each other, as long as we can get a roll call vote of them so we know how they voted on things. We'll be just fine doing it that way. So that's a little bit about the city council, the mayor. Who am I? I am the city manager in the city of Morris. The city council, and it's my understanding, we did some checking on this, that the city manager form of government in Morris goes way back to the beginning of the 1900s. The first record that we see of a city manager being named in the city of Morris is right around 1905. I was told that we're one of the oldest city manager forms of government in Minnesota, and that would probably bear out given the fact that Morris wasn't even here until the mid 1850s, when farmers started coming here to obtain land so they could start farming. City manager, form of government. City manager is hired by the mayor and council, and then the city manager is given some pretty broad authorities to operate the city, which includes hiring personnel, managing them, presenting a budget to the city council, and then implementing that budget and doing all those kind of things. So that's why I'm here. That's what I do, and typically I will coordinate the activities of the council and set up the meetings for them. So it's a big job, but it's what I was trained to do. I love to do it, and they always say if you do what you love to do, it's not really work. And I certainly appreciate being able to be the city manager in my hometown of Morris. And I can cheat because I'm on video, so I brought in my Diet Coke. So why is the city here? That's usually a question I like to ask. Why is the city here? This used to be prairie grass. This area used to be prairie grass, and most of you probably know and understand, based on information you may have gotten already, that the Native Americans pretty much were the ones that had this land and used this land and lived and raised their families on this land. And then as the government took over the land and started giving it away to others, a number of things started happening, including railroads that brought people out, brought things out, and then started bringing back the products that were being raised and things out here. And that's really what Morris is all about. It's a city that was built on the prairie for to handle people coming out here, living here, producing things and bringing them back. And so that's our history of being here. There's a lot of people came from Europe, Scandinavia, Germany, places like that, and I'm a good example of that because I'm half German and half Norwegian. So my Norwegian side came over by Benson, Minnesota, and homesteaded land that they were given if they stayed on it for a number of years. And the other side of my family is German, and they came just north of Alberta and homesteaded land there. And then that's why I'm here today, because of those two family groups that decided to come here. And that's a story that's very commonplace out here on the prairie. There's a lot of European and Scandinavian influence that came here. So what does the city do? Normally what I would do is I would ask a question of you as students of whether or not you have any rules at the school, and more than likely you would tell me that yes, you do have rules at the school, and you have a book that tells you what the rules are. And then I would lift up my rule book. So this is the rule book of the city. I don't know if you can see it very good here. Charter and City Code, City of Morris, Minnesota. And it's a pretty big book. It's got a lot of tabs on it. And what this is this is the charter. I mentioned that we're a city manager form of government. And that's what the charter did, is it set it up as a city manager form of government, talks about how that the government is arranged, and then there's a bunch of rules and regulations that are put in place that tell you all the things that you can and can't do in the city. And actually today we're living in an environment, literally living in an environment where the rules have changed, and we get to set our own rules locally. But then we're part of the state of Minnesota, and the state of Minnesota gets to set rules. And then we're part of the United States of America, and the United States gets to set rules. And so we know that as of today, the governor of Minnesota has established some new rules for us to live by. The interesting part of that is he didn't set them as rules that are going to be heavily enforced. He set them as guidelines for how to live in this current environment with the COVID-19 virus. So as a city, we're asking people to listen to the governor and live by the rules the governor's put in place. As a city, we're not necessarily enforcing rules. And that's a little bit hard for people to understand, because I've had a number of calls this week from people that were wondering, can they play in a playground? why is it that somebody isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing and things like that. And so we're trying to figure out how to live by that. But the general rules that the city has set up are basic rules that need to be put in place if somebody's going to live in a community. Things like, what is the speed limit here? How do we deal with licensing for bars? How do we deal with people mowing their grass or having junky cars on the road? All kinds of things. And where do they put houses? How big can they be? There's lots of rules and regulations. That's really what's in the rule book. And the rules are made by the city council taking action to put in place things by ordinance, which is a specific process that takes place where we have to give the public notice that the city council is going to set a rule. So you might want to listen up, and then they do that by having a first reading of it, and then we have to wait till the next meeting, and then the city council has to let people say what they want to say about it before they discuss it and decide whether or not they want to pass it. And one of the things I would point out to you is that we do have 2 meetings a month. The first item on the agenda after we say the Pledge of Allegiance and take a roll call vote of the members that are present on the city council is we ask if any citizens have any comments to make for their city government. I've always done that as an administrator, and I think it's very important that we do that in government because the organizational chart of the city starts with the citizens, and then it works its way down through the mayor and the city council, and then it comes down to the city manager, and then the city manager has everything else that falls underneath them. And there are some advisory groups that help look at these kind of things, and I'm going to mention those in a minute. But the city council can always also pass a resolution, which is basically a more formal way of saying this is something that I want to do. It's not necessarily a permanent ordinance that has to go through a formal process, but this is important enough for us to document what we're doing. And typically it's going to be things like contracts, buying big things, passing the city budget, doing things like that. And then there's other things that they can do that are maybe less important in the sense that you don't have to do a great big huge document and print it out and sign it and all that kind of stuff, or they can do motions. And anybody that's done any work with parliamentary procedure knows and understands how that works. So they can do a simple motion, and sometimes we do that to accept a donation from somebody. We get donations every now and then for the fire department, for the police department, or somebody might want to donate something to the city like a tree, whatever, and so they can do simple motions. I mentioned other boards and commissions that help the city council in doing their business. They're appointed by the city council. The city council members themselves are elected. I mentioned that they represent the community. So they're elected to 4-year terms, and then every 2 years we have an election, and then depending on what their term is, the mayor might be up with 2 council members, or the mayor might be up with 3 council members. But that's really the way it winds up being. And we'll have an election this fall, and I can't remember right now who's up for election. I think the mayor was up the last time, so it's probably a couple council members. But we have a library board that helps oversee the library. We have a planning commission that focuses on that big code book, but basically on chapter 11, which is, chapter 11 is the codes that deal with where things go in town, what kinds of things you can build, where you can put stuff, rules and regulations on things, because you don't want to put let's say a processing plant next to a church or a school or where people live. You want to put it out in the industrial park so that people don't wind up smelling things and hearing things, and that's a lot of the rules and regulations are based upon sight, smells, sounds, traffic, things that might cause nuisances for people. So the Planning Commission deals with that, and they usually meet once a month. We have an Airport Commission that helps make some decisions on airports every now and then, but they don't meet very often. Civil Service Commission is a 3-member commission that oversees law enforcement issues, hiring of police officers. If there's a major issue with discipline or something happens, the Civil Service Commission would join in. We actually have a joint commission on sharing that hasn't been meeting. It's only there in case there's issues between the city and county where they want to sit down together and talk about stuff. The park board looks at all of our parks and recreation type things. We have a tree board that looks at tree issues. We're a Tree City USA city. Trees are very important. The irony is, and one of the trivia questions for Morris is, when the city was actually first started, how close was the nearest tree to the center of the city? It was about 5 miles away. Morris was prairie. It was all prairie grass everywhere. So fires were a big issue when the city was first started. We have a tourism board that's paid for by lodging tax that helps bring people to Morris for tourist type activities. You might think, why would anybody come to Morris for tourist type activities? And the answer is we're actually on the edge of a number of different just absolutely fantastic places in Minnesota. We're on the edge of the prairie, as I said. We're on the edge of lake country. We're on the edge of river areas. You know, we have Red River that goes north of us. We have the Minnesota River that comes down and goes down into the Mississippi River. We have all kinds of very unique terrain and landscape around us. If you go out to the west and get to the bluffs by South Dakota and North Dakota, it's just a fantastic area. So people hunt, fish, come here, and actually one of the biggest things right now is ag tourism. People come from around the world and look at some of the unique things that are happening in this area with agriculture, including livestock and farming techniques. If you don't know it, Morris now has a carrot processing plant. So if you go into Willie's and pick up a package of Fresha carrots, they came from a plant that is right to the south of the fairgrounds in Morris, and they're probably grown over by Hancock. And so it's the freshest carrots you're ever going to be able to eat because they come from right here and are processed here. So a lot of tourist type activities and a lot of things to see. We have an economic development commission that helps look at business issues. And then we're part of a joint powers agreement for community education and recreation. One of the facilities is the Regional Fitness Center, RFC. So those are all groups that get together and talk about issues that are important to a city. So then if we break it down further, what does the city actually do? You know, I'm the manager of a city. Well, what does the city do? And one of the things I'm going to provide to your teacher, and I'm not sure if you're able to put it up, is the organizational chart of the city. And it kind of lays out all the things that are on there. But if I look at the organizational chart of the city, and I'm going to look down here a couple times, but we have the city manager. The city attorney is actually hired by the city and county, so he's an advisor to the city council and to the city manager. Interestingly enough, the library board is appointed by the council, and they are tasked with the responsibility of running the library, but the library is owned by the city, and all the personnel in the library are part of the employee group of the city. And so it's kind of an interesting thing where I'm responsible for operating everything, and I'm also understanding of the fact that the library board figures out what they're going to do in the library. And then we come down and we have a police department, we have a fire department, we have a finance department, we have a public works department, we have building inspection a building inspector that oversees the construction to make sure that it's done to code in Morris. And then recently, through a grant, we hired a sustainability project coordinator because Morris adopted a sustainability strategic plan where we want to see things done in town to make the world better for the future. We think the future is going to have sustainable, renewable energy sources like solar and wind, and we want to be part of that. And we actually have some projects that we put in place. I have a vehicle that's electric hybrid. The back of City Hall has a electric charging station for that vehicle, and any electric vehicle that comes to Morris to visit us, to do work with us from state agencies and other groups. There's also one on the side of the Willie Super Value in Morris for people that are coming here, and we think that's very important. So that's what that person does. We also have a civil defense effort, which is done in cooperation with the county now, which is the emergency management within crisis times, which we are in. So the county's declared an emergency, the state's declared an emergency, federal government's declared an emergency, and so Donna Greiner is the Stevens County Emergency Management Director, and she's assisted by Reggie Welly, who's our Chief of Police, and is the Deputy Emergency Management Director that represents the city of Morris. Sheriff Dingman, Jason Dingman's the Deputy Emergency Management Director for the county, and they work on the issues that we're dealing with right now, which are incredibly massive in the sense that it's changed the entire way we do business. The city also has a couple other things that are interesting. We have a liquor store, and our liquor store provides revenue to the city through the sale of liquor. And that really goes back to an era in our country where there was prohibition, where liquor was not allowed, and then it was allowed. And so what happened, many cities said, well, if we're going to allow it, we're going to control it. So we're going to be the ones that sell it. And that's why the city of Morris is the only place in Morris that you can buy liquor, because it goes back to that time period. We also have a transit system, an outstanding transit system, one of the better ones in the state of Minnesota for a rural area. Serves about 70,000 passengers a year, and actually we are still open with our transit because of the fact there's a lot of people that do not have vehicles or maybe can't drive and need that type of transportation to connect them to the resources they need, like food and medical supplies, prescriptions, and even medical care. And so our transit system is still running. I mentioned Public Works. We do have Public Works Department. Underneath that Public Works Department, we have streets and we have parks, because we have a number of parks. We also have a public utility. And within that public utility, we have a water system, and you may have heard that last year we opened our brand new water plant that now takes water from about 47 grains of hardness coming out of the ground down to about 5 grains of hardness, and sends it out to all the houses. So houses still have water softeners if they want, but those water softeners will run very little during the year. And the reason we did this was because every water softener uses salt, and that salt would go into the sewer in your house down the drain, and it would go to the sewer plant, go up to the sewer ponds, and then eventually that salt would be going into the Pomni Terre River. And it's an impaired water, and we know and understand in Minnesota how important our lakes and rivers and streams are to us. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to comply with the state of Minnesota's attempt to try to get rid of the salt out of the river, and this water plant does that. And we're very excited about the fact that The amount of salt coming into our sewer plant is about a third of what it was before. It's just incredible how small that load is coming in, and some of the reason it's still coming in is there's still the need to soften from 5 grains hardness down to where people want to use it. We also have the sewer system, as I said, and that takes sewage from all the houses, brings it up to a pond system. It settles in a pond system, and eventually all the bad things go out of it, and then we're able to release that back into the Pomni-Terre River without any issues. And there's a lot of intensive testing and things that go on to make sure that we're doing that the right way. And we have an airport, and typically in small towns like Morris, especially in rural Minnesota, airports aren't that big of a thing anymore, but in Morris it is. It's a massive endeavor because of the fact that we have industry here that utilizes the airport. Superior Industries is a very big company that does a lot of work throughout the country, has subsidiary companies, and they actually have pilots on staff at Superior here in Morris, and they have planes, and they're flying, and that's actually one of the big projects we're working on right now is to do a runway extension of about 900 feet. It's going to allow the Superior to use a different type of aircraft. You're not going to be able to get the big jets in here, but you're going to be able to get in a little bit bigger planes that are faster, that need a little bit longer runway to come in. So we do have the airport, and we work on that, and that's a big endeavor that we have right now that we're actually working on as we speak. We have I mentioned the Planning Commission oversees construction, things like that. Well, the county has a Planning Commission, and on the 20th of April, we're going to go before the County Planning Commission with a conditional use permit for our airport construction project, and that's one of the requirements that we have. So that's kind of what we have in the city, all the different things, and I'm going to finish by just talking about where we get our money and how much money we actually spend. Normally what I would do if I was in a classroom with you, I'd probably ask you a few questions and try to see if anybody could figure out the answers to it, but I'm not going to be able to do that now, so I'll just start out by saying, the big question is, how much money do we spend a year? And so I went back and I looked, and the overall budget of the city, I actually, I'll just hold this up. It's probably backwards though for you, maybe not. The overall budget of the city for 2020 was $11,517,000. So that's the amount of money that I'm responsible for overseeing. Now, the next question I would ask you is, where do we get all that money? Where does it come from? And typically the answer is going to be from taxes. And who pays taxes? Your parents pay taxes. That's typically the answer. But in fact, that's not the answer. And actually, I can tell you as a city manager sitting here today after listening to the governor's briefing, which I do every day at about 2 o'clock, we don't know what next year is going to bring. So of that $11 million, there's a main portion of that is typically considered general city spending, and it's about $4.9 million. There's some other things that we do, like construction. I mentioned the airport, and then I mentioned the water treatment plant and the things that we do there. They're actually, the water treatment plant is actually a business in the sense that we charge people for the water that we sell and taking away the sewer. The liquor store is a business, so we don't include that in the 4.8 million. So then the question is, it's 4.9 or 4.9 million. So how much of that comes from taxes? And the answer is about 17%. So when you think of all the money that we're spending for all those things that I mentioned, um, only 17% of it comes from taxes on the local people. And then the question is, well, where do you get the money from? Well, the majority, the biggest chunk of money comes from assistance from the state and federal government. We have a transit that is funded by the state and federal government, so we get about 80% of the money. But overall, the aid in 2020 is almost $3 million of that 4.8 million. About 61% comes from aid. And so it's very important that the state stay healthy, the federal government stay healthy, so that we can continue to get those resources. Why do we get them? Because even though we have some pretty good industries here, we don't have enough to be able to provide the basic services that we have in Morris, police, fire, all those things that we do, elections, whatever it is. And so we have to get help. And it comes from the state, and we know that that aid is growing at a smaller and smaller rate, so we have to shift to more taxes, and we don't know what's going to happen next year. There was a $1.5 billion projected state surplus going into next year. We believe that's gone because businesses aren't open, people aren't earning money, people aren't going to be paying taxes, and so that's where their money comes from. And so we're going to have to wait and see what's going to happen. The last thing I would say to you is, normally I'd tell you what's new in Morris, but you pretty much know what's new in Morris. COVID-19, we don't know how it's going to end. It'll be gone. We don't know how long, but it'll be gone, and we'll be able to get back to normal. I truly believe that that's what's going to happen. But we have some other things that are happening here too we're excited about. There's a new 16-unit apartment complex that's going up by the north entrance to the university. A gentleman bought that land that's there, and actually it's the third building of 5 buildings that he wants to build. Exciting, I mentioned electric vehicles. The state government applied for a federal grant on our behalf to purchase 2 new electric transit buses. They will be fully electric transit buses, and they'll have 50 kW charging stations out at the Public Works shop to charge them, and we're hoping we get the grant, and then we will be running fully electric transit buses, hopefully within the next year. And then we're continuing to work on other issues like solar projects for city buildings. We got a grant for safe routes to schools so that people can walk and ride bicycles on safe routes that we would establish, that you wouldn't have to worry about being hit by cars and things like that. Number of other things. So we're busy. We're always interested in what young people have to say about what we're doing in Morris. If you ever want to stop in and listen to a council meeting, you're welcome to do it. If you have something to say in the council, come in. Normally we'd have a meeting with 9th graders up at the school, but we won't be able to do that this year. But appreciate having young people interested in civics, and in someday you might be sitting behind this table as a mayor or a council member in Morris or somewhere else, depending on where you go in life. So thanks a lot for listening. Be safe, wash your hands, stay away from everybody, do social distancing, and we'll all be back to what we're doing before shortly. Thanks a lot. Bye.